Welcome! I hope you're doing well. Yesterday I showed you how I use sodium silicate to create crackled pots, and I made 2 vases in that video, and this is one of them. And since yesterday they've been sitting on my table in my workshop for about 24 hours, so they're about ready to be trimmed now. I love trimming, I always did, but with the crackled vases it's a little more tricky to do. So in this video I want to show you in general how I trim my pots, and also more specifically what you need to be aware of when you're trimming crackled pots. Okay, let's get on with it. The first part of trimming is to determine at which stage you want to do the trimming. These pots have been sitting in my workshop for about 24 hours, so they have, I would say soft leather hard feel to it. They're hard enough, so you can touch them and stuff, and especially you have to feel in the bottom. If it's too soft, then it's going to stick when you try and trim it, and it can make it uneven, and it's just not very good. It needs to be almost leather hard. On the other hand, if it's too hard, it will be difficult to trim it the way you want. So it's kind of a feel, but this one feels perfect. I use very few tools when I trim. I prefer, as I also mentioned in my tools video, these trimming tools from Hussein Lin. I can never pronounce that name, I have to learn it sometimes. But these wonderful trimming tools that he creates, they are a little bit expensive, and as I mentioned before, I really like cheap tools. You can find so many amazing tools in hardware stores and general stores that are not for pottery. They're very cheap, but these ones, they do cost quite a lot, but they're very, very nice. I use them almost every day, so I will recommend that you invest in good trimming tools. Of course, I also use a couple of very inexpensive loop tools. You can find them almost anywhere. And then I have a special tool that I'm going to show you in a second. Well, it looks like just a normal measurement tool, but it's not quite normal. I will show you that, because one of the tricky parts about trimming the bottom at a vase like this is how much can you trim off. I like to trim off and leave a small rim there. I like that look of it. Maybe you want to keep it flat, in that case it's much easier. But I always throw my vases with a little bit too much at the bottom. In this case, it's about 1.5 centimeters, something like that. I want to trim it down to not much more than 0.5 centimeter. But how much can you actually trim off? How thick is it? Well, sometimes you can tap it and get a feel for it, but it's not really very precise. So that's why I have this tool that I made. You can also buy these tools commercially, but again, I like to make my own tools, and this is very inexpensive. I picked up these 2 measurements from a local hardware store. And what I did is, in one of them, as you see, I made a hole and I made a slide in this side. So how are we going to use that? It's very simple. First of all, you use the hole in the middle, and this one, the second one that I rounded off a little bit, put it here, and then you slide it down to see how tall it is on the inside. And in this case, it's, let me see, it's a little bit difficult, 18.1 centimeter. Now use the other slide on the other side, on the outside, and do the same thing. And it's 19.2 centimeters, so it wasn't quite as thick as I thought, which is a good thing to know now before start trimming. So it's about 1.2 centimeters, something like that. So I can trim off maybe 70 millimeter or 7 millimeter, something like that. I'll still leave 0.5 centimeter at the bottom. So that's important to know. We can do the same thing on the other vase that we did yesterday. This one is also feels ready. So let's see how thick I made that one. First we measure on the inside, and that one is 15.5, and on the outside it's 18.1. 16.5. So it's only 1 centimeter. So 1 centimeter and 1.2 centimeter. So that means I have to be a little bit careful when I trim these and not trim off too much. I've done that a few times and that's not working. So let's move on to the wheel and start trimming. Before we start trimming, there's one important thing, and that is to keep your trimming tools sharp. As I mentioned, these tools I really like, and they do tend to keep sharp for quite a long. But when I start trimming, I always give them a fresh sharpening. I have this small diamond grinder that I use, and basically I use a piece of wood to control it, make it a little bit wet. It doesn't have to be very wet, but just, so it's a little bit wet, and put my tool like this, and then slowly grind it. If you keep your tools sharp, you don't actually need to grind them very much, and then they will be super sharp. It will leave a little bit of black stuff here. Get rid of that because it will mess up your pot. I already sharpened the other ones, so I'm not gonna do that again. So now we're ready to trim the vase. I always start with the bottom, and for that and for a vase like this, of course you can't just put it down on your wheel head like that. So you need a chuck. And so what is a chuck? This is a chuck. This is basically a raw piece of pot that I created, especially for this. I didn't fire it because when you keep it unfired like this, if you just wet it a little bit, it will stick a little bit to the pot if you need that. And it doesn't last forever, but I had this one for I think more than a year, and it's very easy to make a new one if I need that. So I'm gonna place this approximately where it's supposed to be, and then you can take the pot and put it upside down into the chuck. Now for the crackled vases, that is not always recommendable because we want to keep these nice crackles. We don't want to mess them up. If you just put them into the chuck, you may disturb them. So what I found out, the easiest way to solve this is just taking a piece of bubble plast like this. I make a hole in the middle, and I then put it over the pot like this, and this will protect the pot from the sides of the chuck. So put it upside down. It can be a little bit disturbing with all this, but you can move it around. Now before you start centering the chuck, it needs to be in level. And as I also presented in my tools video, I use this very small leveler. I bought it in a car supply shop. I think they use it to level for camping and things like that. Anyway, very inexpensive if you buy there. You can also buy it in photo shops. I think maybe some pottery stores have it too. Much more expensive. This one was very inexpensive. I think when I was like 20-30 kroner, so less than $5. This will show you if it's totally in level. There's this little bubble, almost like a normal leveler, but this goes to all sides. Just put it on top of your pot, and then you can adjust the level of the pot like this. Now it's leveled. So now you know when you start turning the wheel that it's actually in level. You can then center the chuck in many ways. I know lots of potters like to tap center. I never got around to learning that. I know I should, but I'm centering pretty well, just moving it around very slowly. So let's do that. Now with the edges of the pot not being even at this point, it can be a little bit tricky to see if you actually have it centered correctly. A good way of checking that is just to make a small mark when the wheel turns, and then you can much better see if the distance is okay. Okay, we can now see there's a little more thickness over here than here, so it needs to be moved a bit closer to me. And you can wipe out the mark and make a new one. Yeah, that looks much better. So once we have centered it, we wanna tighten it to the wheel head so it doesn't move around. I'm just using a small piece of clay for that. And just make sure you hold on to it so it doesn't move around when you do this. Like that. And put one on the other side. Okay, now we're ready to trim. I usually start out by just taking off the uneven edgy sides of the button. That way I can also better judge if I actually got it centered correctly, and if I didn't, then I can move it around a little bit. I don't perfect the outside of the button yet, but I do like to get some sort of feel for how much I want to take off here. In this particular case, I don't want to take too much off because I don't want to leave the rim much smaller than, or the foot much smaller than it is. If you have a lot of clay in here, you may want to take off some of that before you start creating the inner rim. But in this case, I don't want to keep it any smaller than it is. So now we're ready to kind of mark where we want the inner rim to be. I always start out making it a little bit bigger than what I may eventually make. It's easier to take off than it is to add, which is kind of impossible. And I always start out with making this this groove that I can then use as a marker for my other trimming. Now you can use these trimming tools to trim out the button. You can also use a loop tool to do that. It depends a little bit on how much you need to trim out, in my opinion, and how soft it is. In this case, it's not too soft, so we can use the trimming tools. Otherwise, I would use the loop tool. Maybe I will use eventually a combination of the two. I'm just using the loop tool to make sure that the actual button of my pot is even. Actually, as it turned out, I want to take a little more than what is easy to do with the Hussein tools. I'm just going to use the loop tool to take off a little more, a little bit faster. I don't want to run it too fast because sometimes it can slip, and if it's too fast you tend to mess up the entire button. Now during the trimming you can also tap the button, and if it starts to sound a little more hollow, it's about enough. In this case, there's still some more. We can also use our measurement tools. I'll show you that in a second to see how much we actually trimmed off. But I'm sure we can take a bit more here. So now I want to see how much we took off. So I'm gonna just grab my measurement tool. Basically use it the same way as we did on the inside. We just put it across and we take it here. And we can see we now trim about 0.7 centimeter. So we actually, you can also feel that it's kind of, you know, yeah, when you press it, you can feel that it's not very thick anymore. So I'm just gonna do the last part of the trimming. I want to make the edges really nice, and I maybe want to make the rim a little smaller than what it is. Okay, I think that's about it. Okay, now we're ready to do the outside. And for this one, as I said, I don't want to trim off too much. So I'm just gonna try and make it even here. Also, what I want to do is I want to make a sharp edge going from the crackle surface until the start of the rim. Sometimes this tool is a little easier to achieve that. Also, at this stage, I'm thinking about how do I want to glaze it. So I always like to keep a kind of a sharp edge between where I want the glaze and where I don't want to glaze. In this case, I don't want glaze on the bottom rim here, and I want to glaze it just up here. So I want to make it very easy for me to separate the areas of the glaze with the areas that I'm not going to glaze. So I'm leaving this little bit of a groove here. Will make it easy to make a more sharp edge. Now we're almost done. To make it, to make sure that the button is very smooth, I sometimes use a small shiny stone. You can pick up anything like that. Find it in the beach if you're close to a beach, and just polish it a little bit. Polish the bottom and polish the edges. It's gonna help you make it even more smooth, so it doesn't scratch up the surface of your table or wherever you're gonna put the pots on. So the last step is to put my stamp on it. I have a small one that I use on the outside. That's it. You have to watch out because if it's too soft and you push this stamp into the side, it will kind of bulb up here. So always, keep my finger here and push it in. In this case, it's a pretty solid rim, so it doesn't matter. So now we have the button ready. I think it turned out nice. It could have been a little thinner, but for this, it is a kind of a bulky vase, so I don't like it to be too thin. It kind of looks strange in a way, I think. So now we're done with the chuck, and now we need to do the top part. And now it's important that you clean your wheel head, because this is now a little softer than what it was before we started trimming, because we took out the outer soft layer of it, so you don't want any crumbles or anything sticking to the bottom. And in general, you want to be very careful now when you move it around, because it is softer now, so it's more vulnerable. Now we basically do the same thing, centering it. I think that's good enough. And again, using a little bit of clay to attach it to the wheel head. And always when you do this, use the same clay as you used when you were throwing the pot, because I also have some red clay and some porcelain and stuff, and if you use a different kind of clay, maybe it will smudge off and it will leave marks on your pot. Also, when you're trimming a chatted or a structured vase, textured vase like this, you have to be very careful not to accidentally hit the side with your tool or with your nail or something, because then it will destroy the beautiful texture that you created. And I've done that on a few occasions. Okay, so now we have a clean surface. I just want to do a little bit of trimming on the rim here. I'm not going to do much here. I'm just going to kind of make it very smooth, because that's what I want for this, and round it off beautifully. Okay, I think that's it. So for this particular pot, you could just make it very smooth like it is now here. That would be nice. But just for the demonstration, also, I want to create a chattering effect on this part before the neck. I will go into chattering a lot more in some future videos, and I will show you how different you can make the chattering depending on how wet or dry the clay is. In this case, it is rather dry, so the chattering marks are not going to be very deep. but can still be beautiful. For chattering, you can use all sorts of tools. Again, I like to use these Hussein Lin tools. You can also build your own tools, as I showed you in a previous video. These ones I made myself from hacksaw blades. And you can also, you know, some people like to have them bended, or you can use, and there are also other kinds of specialized chattering tools. But I like this one. I use the one that is the longest one. And the trick here is to let the tool kind of chatter. So when you use it like this, you have to hold it in the end, so it becomes almost like a little spring, and it will like chatter this way. Whether you do it this way, or you do it on the corner, or you do it on a 90 degree or 45 degree, it will change the chattering a lot. You need to move it down at around the same speed as it takes for the pot to get maybe 1 or 2 rounds. This can be very tricky. I found that when you hold it like this, it can be difficult to control. And it's a matter of practice. But let's try and see how it goes with this one. It needs to spin rather fast for this to work. So I'm not sure if you can actually see it here. We can maybe zoom in a little bit. So I think you can see. As I said, the chatting effect is not going to be so deep for this one, because the clay is now very dry. If it was a little more wet, we could make deeper chattering, or we could use a different tool. But in this case, I think it kind of connects the texture, the heavy texture surface with the neck in a beautiful way. So that's it. Now we're done with this part. So that was the first part. We got the bottom trimmed, and we got the top with a little bit of chattering effect, and I think it looks pretty nice. Now we just need it to dry up, ready for bisque firing. So if you had enough, you can jump out of the video now, but I'm just gonna do the other part as well. I'm not gonna speak as much, I'm just gonna run through it the same way that I did the first part, but of course with some variations based on the shape of that exact pot. this one I'm also going to do a little bit of chattering, but I'm not going to do it until the very edge. I'm going to start it a little bit down, so it's just going to be this this border of chattering. And then to kind of mark it, I'm just going to leave a small edge here. So, and as you can maybe see, maybe if I zoom in a little more, you can see that the clay here was a little more wet, so we could make a little more deep chattering effect. Again, if it's even more wet, you can leave even deeper chattering effects. I will come back in a future video going deeper into the different kinds of chattering effects you can achieve, but I kind of like the way that it connects the sides with the top of this type of particular design. So that's all I had for you today. We got to trim these two textured vases, the sodium silicate vases that we did yesterday. Trimmed the bottom and the top, did some chattering effect, and now they're ready to dry and get brisk fired. I will show you once they're brisk fired how I glaze them, because there are also some tricks with these textured vases of how you can emphasize the structures. So I will show you that once we get to that point. But that's all I had for today, and remember, as always, please subscribe to my channel. It will show your support, and also you will get notified about future videos. I do have some more interesting videos, I think, about some other interesting techniques coming up. So I hope to see you again. Have a good day.